There is a particular phenomenon in the natural world where the horizon takes on a strange, bruised violet hue. Not black, not stormy gray, but a deep, electric purple. Meteorologists describe this as the atmospheric saturation point before a derecho, and veteran storm trackers recognize the gravity of that color. It signifies that the environment has reached its absolute capacity for tension and is about to discharge a massive amount of kinetic force. The empath who has reached their limit functions on this exact mechanism. They have spent years acting as a sponge for toxicity, gaslighting, and psychological theft. And when they finally break, they don't merely argue. They systematically dismantle the entire architecture of the narcissist's life. If this hits home, make sure to like and subscribe, because we are exploring a psychological shift that stays hidden from the mainstream. Here is what the general public gets wrong about highly sensitive people. The world has labeled them as professional victims, fragile characters who soak up everyone's trauma and have meltdowns in quiet corners. But empathy isn't a flaw. It is a high-level operating system for emotional intelligence. Empaths monitor pupil dilation, decode micro-shifts in vocal pitch, and identify an ulterior motive before the other person even draws a breath. They function like organic cryptographers, constantly turning subtext into readable intelligence. And when you have that much data on someone, you aren't a target, you're a strategist. You've simply made the conscious choice to keep those tools locked away until they are required. The manipulator has always operated on one catastrophic assumption. They believe the empath's gentleness is actually a lack of awareness. They mistake mercy for stupidity and patience for a bad memory. A narcissist will probe your boundaries like a software exploit, looking for a backdoor, pushing the envelope a bit further every day, lying with more arrogance and manipulating with more confidence. They are certain they are the apex predator in this environment. But here is the irony. The empath has been recording every single interaction, not in a physical diary or on a phone, but in a mental database so precise it would rival a forensic audit. Every inconsistency, every gaslighting attempt, every single time the narcissist's narrative contradicted itself, the empath wasn't falling for the trick. They were documenting the method. Now, let's examine the mechanics of the transformation. Clinicians have a name for this: the acute cognitive break from denial. It is essentially the mind's immune response. It is the moment the brain identifies a pathogen it has been carrying for years and initiates a total purge. The empath wakes up one morning and the mental fog just vanishes. Not slowly, but with the flip of a switch. It's as if someone pulled the curtains back in a room where they've been stumbling around for a decade. Suddenly, they perceive the narcissist's games with microscopic clarity. The grand gestures weren't love, they were baiting. The silent treatment wasn't a mood, it was psychological conditioning. The apologies weren't heartfelt. They were tactical resets to keep the cycle going. And once an empath identifies the pattern, they cannot unsee it. This is where the real danger manifests. The exhausted empath stops reacting with emotion. This destabilizes the narcissist immediately because your emotional volatility is their primary source of energy. They are anticipating a fight, or tears, or a desperate plea for one more chance. Instead, they are met with a wall of clinical indifference. The empath stops arguing because they've reached a vital realization. They aren't in a relationship.
They are in a controlled experiment, and they have just decided to become the lead scientist instead of the lab rat. They begin answering questions with single words. They stop revealing their inner world because they understand that vulnerability is just ammunition for the narcissist's next attack. This transition is terrifying for the narcissist because their main remote control just ran out of batteries. Here is why this is fascinating from a neurological perspective. Data from the Max Planck Institute indicates that empaths don't just feel more, they show heightened metabolic activity in the anterior insula and the cingulate cortex. These are the brain's hubs for self-awareness and social processing. When an empath is in their baseline state, these regions are hyperactive, making them overly attuned to the needs of others, often at their own cost. But when that snap happens, something incredible occurs. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logistics and executive planning, takes the driver's seat. The empath essentially moves from an emotional operating system to a tactical one. They are still reading all that social data, but now they are using it as tactical intelligence rather than internalizing it as a burden. The narcissist built their whole world around your predictability. They relied on your habitual patterns, the desire to mend things, the need for closure, the hope that, this time, would be different. That a fed-up empath becomes completely unpredictable because they have stopped following their old code. They aren't trying to rehabilitate the narcissist or save the connection anymore. They aren't even angry in the way people usually expect. There is something much more cold about it. They are finished. And finished doesn't engage in debate, it doesn't explain its reasoning. It doesn't offer exit interviews or final explanations, it simply walks out the door and cuts the line. What makes this particularly ruinous for the narcissist is that empaths usually act as their emotional life support system. The narcissist has outsourced their sense of worth, their shame management, and their very stability to the empath. When that support system is yanked away, they don't just lose a partner, they lose their psychological foundation. It's like pulling the load-bearing wall out of a house. The collapse is unavoidable. The narcissist will try every trick in the book. The fake tears, the victim stories, the threats, and the hoovering. But here is the kicker. The fed-up empath has already played out all those scenarios in their head. They have mentally rehearsed every move the narcissist could possibly make, because they've been observing the playbook for years. They aren't just a step ahead, they have already finished the game, while the narcissist is still setting up the board. Then there is the factor of social exposure, which is the narcissist's greatest fear. Usually, the empath is the one protecting the abuser's image, often better than the abuser does themselves. They cover up the outbursts, they make excuses for the behavior, and they take the blame in public to keep the peace. But when an empath stops curating that fiction, the narcissist's mask begins to shatter. The fed-up empath doesn't even need to go on the offensive. They simply stop lying for the other person. They stop making excuses. They let the narcissist's actions stand on their own merit. And that simple act of telling the truth is more damaging than any act of revenge. The research community has noted this specific stage in recovery literature, even if it's not widely publicized. Experts who work with survivors of high-conflict personalities see a clear phase where a client moves from self-doubt to absolute clarity. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a leading voice on narcissistic dynamics, describes it as the pivot where a victim becomes a survivor and then becomes someone who simply refuses to tolerate the behavior ever again. It isn't about finding a way to forgive. It is about acknowledging an incompatibility at a biological level. In the end, the empath doesn't even hate the narcissist. They simply see them as something that is no longer viable for a healthy life. It's like discovering food has gone bad. You don't get into an argument with expired milk, you just pour it down the drain and get on with your day. What is truly poetic about this is that the narcissist actually created their own worst enemy. Every boundary they ignored taught the empath where to build a stronger wall. Every lie they told trained the empath's crap detector. Every manipulation tactic they used was a lesson in how the mind can be controlled.
The narcissist was so preoccupied with winning the moment that they didn't see they were training a master strategist. By the time the empath reaches the breaking point, they are no longer an amateur. They are a specialist in the narcissist's own psychology, armed with years of data and zero emotional attachment to the results. The exit is usually quiet, which is why it's so unsettling. There is no big explosion, no final dramatic scene. The empath just reorganizes their life without the narcissist in it, and they do it with terrifying efficiency. They change the locks, they shift their social circles, and they move on. They don't look for payback because they've realized the most lethal response is total indifference. And for someone who lives on attention, whether it's love or hate, indifference is the end of the line. Being ignored is far more painful than being loathed, because at least loathing proves they still have power over you. Indifference proves they never mattered.
So, why is the awakened empath more dangerous than the person who hurt them? Because the narcissist is driven by ego and habit. They need external validation. They fear being seen. They are slaves to their own patterns. But an empath who is done is operating from a place of pure self-preservation. They don't need anything from the narcissist, which means the narcissist has no leverage left. You cannot control someone who doesn't care about your opinion anymore. You cannot manipulate someone who is perfectly happy to walk away from everything. You cannot gaslight someone who trusts their own eyes more than your words. The narcissist's entire toolkit is useless against someone who has become immune. The real threat isn't a fight, it's immunity. The fed-up empath becomes unreachable, and that is the narcissist's ultimate defeat. Have you hit that point of clarity? Leave a comment about the moment the light finally came on for you. Let's talk about it because these experiences need a voice. And if you found this insightful, subscribe for more breakdowns of the psychology we all live through but rarely name. I'll see you in the next one.